Alright, so getting into the next set of videos for methods, what we're going to go through is a couple of different types of problems that we can solve. So for each one of these, what I'm going to do is just present the problem, go through the kind of the step-by-step set of actions that we want to be able to take with our program, and then also kind of explain how we might go about using methods to achieve some of those actions or some of those tasks. So the first problem that we're going to take a look at is going to be asking the user to enter the name of a file. We'll go ahead and look into that file, and inside of it we are expecting to find a bank account balance. That is to say that we're going to find some kind of number in there that just shows how much money they currently have in that bank account. From there we can go ahead and do things like perform deposits on the bank account that bank account balance, or perform withdrawals on that bank account balance. And then finally we want to go ahead and be able to display the bank account balance again after we performed these kinds of changes on it. So we'll be able to see, based on both the second step, getting the bank account, and then that final step, displaying that bank account, essentially that's going to be the same thing, but just kind of happening either before or after we perform our withdrawals. So let's go ahead and minimize this, and we'll go ahead and start putting together something to achieve all of these different tasks. And the way that I'm going to do this, I'm actually just going to go ahead and grab everything that I've got in this slide right here. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, and I'll keep that handy so that I can use that as a comment in my program, and we can kind of break it down from there. So we'll go ahead and create a new project, make a new Java application. For this one, since this is going to be dealing with the contents of our bank account balance, I'm going to go ahead and name it like that. So I'll say bank account balance, and then just go ahead and click finish. And in this bank account balance program, start by going ahead and get rid of some of these extra comments. For this particular one, I am going to actually keep this documentation comment. I'm going to go ahead and put in everything that I just grabbed. Let's go ahead and tab that over just once. And then from here, we'll go ahead and clean up the rest of the style. And let's go ahead and get rid of just this to-do stub. Again, because I'm dealing with multiple methods, the other comment I'll go ahead and keep is going to be the documentation comment for each one of the different methods that we're working with. One thing I will go ahead and do, we don't really care about the parameter for the main method. We're not too concerned with what that does or what the purpose of it is, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the comment about that. But other than that, I'll go ahead and keep the documentation comment for the main method, since I do want to say a little bit about what its purpose is going to be, or what role it's going to serve within this program. So the primary purpose for the main method, this is going to essentially hold the set of input and message dialog boxes that we can display to the user, allowing them to kind of step through all of the different actions that they can take. So let's go ahead and actually say that that's what it does. So say holds input and message dialog boxes. And so because of the fact that we want to go ahead and use these message and dialog boxes, we'll go ahead and include an import for that. So we're going to go ahead and import from the javadoc.swing.joptionPane class. Go ahead and save that. And then right here, what we can go ahead and do is start off by creating an input dialog where the user can actually make a choice about what it is that they want to do. So this kind of is going to be like, think of it like a main menu, where they're going to be choosing from one of several different actions that they can take. So the primary things that the user should be able to choose would include things like getting the amount from that bank account balance, being able to perform a deposit on that amount, and then being able to perform a withdrawal on that amount. So let's go ahead and create an input dialog box that can achieve those three different things. So to start off with, we're going to need a string for the user's input. We'll say that this is going to be equal to joptionPane.show input dialog. So we'll go ahead and just grab the very first one there. And inside of here, we'll go ahead and just put in the string for the message that we're going to display to them. So for this one, what we want to go ahead and say is something like choose an option. And then on the next line, we'll go ahead and put each one of our different options. So do something like a \n, and then we'll say 1 display bank account balance. And at this point, it's kind of starting to wrap to the next line. So I'll just position my mouse about right here, push enter, and just let it wrap to the next line and kind of take care of the string concatenation automatically for me. So try to take full advantage of some of the conveniences of doing this in NetBeans. I'll go ahead and do another new line character right here, and then go ahead and do 2 and say perform deposit on bank account balance. And again, it's kind of going off into this line right here. So go ahead and wrap this to the next line. And then for the last one, do another \n, and then we'll say 3 perform withdrawal on bank account balance. And once again, just go ahead and position the mouse bar right here, push enter, and that'll give us most of what we want for that first input dialog. So if we were to go ahead and run this program right now, all we would see is just that input dialog box. It would give us one of these 3 different choices. We'd just pick one, just pushing either 1, 2, or 3, and then the value that we put in would go into this input string that we have right here. From there, the program wouldn't do anything else because we haven't told it to do anything else. So let's see if we can go ahead and actually make this input dialog box do something. So in this next part right here, what we want to go ahead and do is to tell the program if the input that we just got, keeping in mind that this is a string, so we're going to need to use the string method equals. If that equals 1, then that's going to tell us that we want to perform the action of getting the value from that, that file, getting that bank account balance. So before I start to add any of the code right here, I'm just going to go ahead and leave a comment right now and just say get balance from file. So we can kind of keep track of what the purpose of this is going to be. Alternatively, if the input is equal to a 2, so we'll say else if input dot equals 2, then we want to go ahead and perform a deposit. So we'll just say perform deposit here. Otherwise, then if the input is a 3, then what we want to go ahead and do is say something like perform withdrawal. And then the final case that we want to consider, we don't need another method to do this last part. This is basically just kind of be like our input validation, where we would say that if they didn't give us 1, 2, or 3, so we'll just say else, basically for any other string that they give us. We'll just go ahead and display a message dialog box. And for this message dialog box, the component is just going to be null, so still not too concerned with that. The main thing that we want to worry about is the string for the message, so we'll say something like choose either 1, 2, or 3 for an option. Okay, so if we want to go ahead and test this right now, the main things that we're concerned with now is just being able to display this input dialog box and then just checking this little bit of input validation that we have at the end. That's pretty much the only thing this program can do right now. So if we go ahead and run this, then we can see we've got our input dialog. It's just going to say choose an option. It's going to be display bank account balance, perform deposit, perform withdrawal. So we've got our 1, 2, and 3. So if we were to put in something like, say, 4 or 5 or maybe a total phrase like hello world, anything like that doesn't work. So if you go ahead and push OK, then it's going to say choose either 1, 2, or 3 for an option. And then at that point, it's going to close the program. So one last thing we want to go ahead and include at the end of the main method to make sure that it terminates properly. Go ahead and make sure that we include system.exit 0 because we are working with dialog boxes. Okay, so right now we've got it set up so that it will display that input dialog box. We pick an option, and then from there, whatever option we picked, it kind of just steps through that, and then we hit the end of the program and we stop there. So let's go ahead and actually expand on each one of these other 3 types of inputs, or 3 valid inputs, 1, 2, and 3. So for each one of those, now what we're concerned with is things like getting the bank account balance in the file. We've got to ask the user to enter the name of that file so we can do that. We want to perform deposits on the bank account balance. Again, that's going to require things like the name of the file and then the amount to deposit. Performing withdrawals. Again, we need the name of the file and then the amount to withdraw. So for each one of these, if we think a little bit about what I just described, that kind of gives you an idea about things like the parameters. So what do we need to pass into our methods, as well as what do we need to return from those methods, if anything at all. So to start off with, let's say we go ahead and do the very first one. We're going to go ahead and ask the user to enter the name of a file, and then we'll get the bank account balance in that file. So let's go ahead and grab these 2 pieces right here, and let's come down here and create another method. So we'll go ahead and create our documentation comment and put that quote that we have right there. I'm just going to space it over a little bit to keep these things aligned. And then underneath this is where we're going to go ahead and set up our first custom method, so something besides the main method. So if we're going to ask the user to enter the name of a file, and then we want to get the bank account balance that is in that file. So I have a public static. In this particular case, since we say that we want to get the bank account balance in the file, that tells us that we should go ahead and return whatever that balance is. We can go ahead and assume that the balance is probably a double. Makes sense for a currency that would have, some dollar amount and then some amount of change left over. So we'd say something like public static double. So that's going to be our return type. And then we can go ahead and call this something like, let's say, get balance, since that's going to be the intended purpose of it. And then the thing that we need to pass into it is going to be a string with the name of the file. So we can go and do string, we'll call it something like file name. And then right here, what we want to go ahead and do is say that once we've got this file name, we want to go ahead and use that to create a file object. And then we're going to put that file object into a scanner so that we can read from the file. So at this point, we're kind of just going into all the stuff that's related to file input and output. So thinking back to how to read from a file, dealing with the file object and the scanner object. So those are going to be things that we need here. But in order to actually start putting those things into this part of the program, we again need to make sure that we're actually importing the classes necessary to do that. So we'll come back up here. And in addition to importing the JOptionPane class, let's go ahead and include another import. Let's say that we'll start with the scanner. So we're going to do import java.util.scanner. And then we also want to go ahead and import all of the classes from our IO package, since that's the sort of standard way that we're going to approach getting everything for file input and output. So we'll do java.io.star. And so from here, now we can go ahead and finish out the rest of that method that we were working on. So coming back down to where we were. So the next thing that we want to go ahead and do is put in the file object. So we'll just call this file with a lowercase f. Say this is equal to a new file object. And we're going to go ahead and put in the file name that is being passed into the method. So we're going to use this parameter right here in our construction of that file object. The next thing we want to go ahead and do is create a scanner. So say scanner. In this case, we'll call this input file. This will be equal to a new scanner object, and we're going to give it that file object that we want to actually read. From here, what we can go ahead and do is essentially just go grab the one item that is going to be in that file. So the only thing that we're going to place into it is going to be the double for the amount. So we want to go ahead and put that in right here. So we're going to say something like double, we'll call it balance, is going to be equal to the input file dot next double. Okay. And so then once we have that, then we can go ahead and just return that. So at the very end of all of this, we'll just go ahead and say return balance. Okay. So all this looks good, but we seem to have an error right here. So we'll go ahead and double check right here. And the error message that it's giving us is unreported exception, file not found exception, must be caught or declared to be thrown. So what this is talking about is that, again, because I'm working with files, so we're dealing with file input and output, remember that we need to specify that this is capable of throwing an exception, and we need some way to be able to handle that. So what we're going to go ahead and do is just add that throws clause to the method header of getBalance. So we'll go ahead and say throws IO exception right here. And so then when we do that, then that error will go away. Go ahead and save. And so now we've got this little bit of code inside of our getBalance method to go ahead and just grab whatever that current balance happens to be. Alright, so now that we've got all of this, now we can come back over to the main method and start adding all of this up there. So if we come over here, so right here, this is going to be if the input is equal to 1, we can go ahead and do this. So let's go ahead and replace this comment with our, let's say we want another input dialog box so that the user has some way to specify the name of the file that they want to read from in order to get that balance. So we'll say something like string. We'll call the string file name so that it is consistent. Say this is equal to joptionPane.show input dialog. And right here, go ahead and replace that with a string. And right here, we're just going to go ahead and say, please enter the name of the file. And then from there, it'll go ahead and just take this name that we put in the file name. We can go ahead and make a call to getBalance. And that call is going to return a value. So what we want to go ahead and do is put that value into another variable right here in the main method. So that then we can go ahead and display that to the user. So right here, we'll go ahead and make another variable. Again, we can call it balance. So again, we're just going to be consistent with what we already named it in our getBalance method, and say this is going to be equal to that call to getBalance. And then we want to go ahead and pass in the file name right here. Okay. And so if we double check the error that it's giving us, so in this case, we again see this error message about unreported exception, this time IO exception, basically the same as a file not found exception as far as we're concerned. So this is kind of an interesting error that we're getting. So if we come down to the getBalance method, we see that we've got a throws clause right here. So it seems like that exception is already going to be reported, or it's already being handled right here inside of getBalance because of this throws clause that we added. But there's a bit of an issue with the way that exceptions need to be handled in a program, which is that not only do you need to handle that within the method where you're performing, say in this case, your file IO, but anytime that you include another method that calls that method, then the calling method also has to have a throws clause. So in this case, the calling method is going to be the main method. So we need to go ahead and include a throws clause here as well. So we're going to say throws IO exception right there, and now that's going to fix that error. And then finally, now that we've corrected that error, we go ahead and just get the balance using the getBalance method. We'll go ahead and store that into this balance variable right here, and then we just want to go ahead and display that to the user. So we can go ahead and include a message dialog box to accomplish that. So we're going to say something like joptionPane.show message dialog. And let's say for this one, we again want null for our component. And then for the string, we'll just go ahead and display that balance. Specifically, we want to display that balance as an actual currency. So that means that it should have 2 decimal places for the amount of change in it. So rather than just doing a regular string, let's go ahead and do a formatted string. So I'm going to say string.format. And right here, we can start off by putting in our formatted string, and then we'll have our comma, and then the balance, the variable that we want to place into that string. So we'll go ahead and say that the current balance is, we'll have a $, and then percent to start our format specifier, and then .2f to indicate that this is going to be a floating point number and that it's going to be rounded to 2 decimal places. And then we'll have a period at the very end. And then do a comma, and then right after our formatted string, we're going to go ahead and put in the balance. Okay. Okay, so now if we were to go ahead and run this program, now we could try to test this out, and let's see what happens if we try to use this right now. So if we go ahead and run this, it's going to go ahead and say display, choose an option, and we've got our 1, 2, and 3 right here. So we're going to go ahead and choose option 1, push OK. We'll go ahead and enter the name of the file. So this is the part where things get kind of interesting. So what exactly is the name of the file here? Well, we haven't really specified a file yet, so if we were to try to type something in, just anything really, say like a text file called balance, and push OK. Well, looks like we don't actually find that, so we're going to get that file not found exception. So it successfully caught the exception thanks to the fact that we have a throws clause there. So we should probably go ahead and fix this and actually add in a text file. So let's go over to files here. Go ahead and open up the project. Right here, we'll just go ahead and create it. So I'm just going to go ahead and right click on the folder for my project, go to new, and right here what we want to go ahead and do is just create, let's say other, and we should be able to find a text file one. And if we can't find it here, that's fine. Yeah, I think they're primarily looking for programming files. That's fine. The alternative approach is to just go ahead and go into documents and create that text file. So we'll go ahead and just do it that way. So if we come over to our File Explorer, we'll go over to Documents, go into NetBeans Projects, and we're specifically looking for the bank account balance project. So for most of you, probably this will not be nearly as long, so a little bit easier to find than for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into the bank account balance, and right here inside of bank account balance, I'm going to go ahead and create that file. So in this case, I'll just go ahead and do new, and let's go ahead and do a text document, and just go ahead and call it balance. Okay, so now we've got our balance.txt. So now let's try that again and see what happens. So go ahead and minimize this. And let's go ahead and run this program again now. So now it'll say display bank account balance. We'll go ahead and push 1. We'll go ahead and enter the name of the file. So now we know what it is. It's balance.txt. We'll go ahead and push OK. And it seems that we've gotten another exception. So now we get the exception no such element. So if we look through this a little bit, we can kind of see where exactly it's telling us that we get that. So the main thing we're concerned with, the first little bit of blue text that we run into kind of gives us a hint. So it's on line 58. So if we come down a little bit, line 58 right here. So that's going to be this line where we are trying to get a double from that file and store that into balance. And it's trying to tell us no such element. So what that's really trying to tell us is that we were looking for a double inside of that file, but we didn't find a double in there. So if we go ahead and come back over to our File Explorer, we'll go ahead and open up balance.txt, and unsurprisingly, because we just made the file, there's nothing inside of it. So we need to go ahead and put in a balance right now. So let's say that maybe there's a separate piece to this program where it will kind of initialize your balance with some starting amount. So maybe when you first create a balance or a bank account at some particular bank, you go ahead and initialize that balance to something. Let's say you start off with maybe a few $100s. We'll start off with something like 800. So we'll go ahead and write it out as a currency, put like 800.00. We'll go ahead and save that. And so now, whenever we go ahead and do this, now we should expect that 800 to be displayed in that final message dialog. So we'll go ahead and do that. We should be finished with this now, so we'll go ahead and close this. And so now, if we go ahead and run this one more time, so now we'll go ahead and choose option 1 again. We'll go ahead and choose the balance.txt file. Go ahead and just push enter this time. And now we finally get that final message dialog where it says the current balance is, and then $800. Go ahead and push OK on that, and then the program will terminate successfully. Alright, so that gives us our first method. So let's go ahead and clean up this documentation comment just a little bit so that we can actually add in the rest of the stuff that we're going to need. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just grab this, just go ahead and cut that. I'm going to remove this documentation comment and just remake it. And the reason I'm going to do that is because of the fact that I want it to automatically populate with things like param, return, And conveniently enough, it also has a throws parameter, or a throws annotation tag for the IO exception in our throws clause. So we can go ahead and leave that in as well. And then right here, I'm going to go ahead and just plug in what it does. So we're going to say ask the user to enter the name of a file. So that's going to be essentially what happens in the main method. So we can go ahead and get rid of that. The primary thing we're concerned with here is get the bank account balance in a file. So that's going to be what this method actually does. So then if we want to go ahead and take a quick look at this, just look at it briefly. Go over to Window, IDE Tools. Let's go ahead and open up our Javadoc documentation. So then we can go ahead and see everything that's inside of it. So we can see we've got our public static double get balance with a string file name and throws IO exception. So it includes the entire method header with the throws clause here. We're going to say get the bank account balance in a file. For the parameters, we've got our file name. It's capable of throwing an IO exception, so it's going to have a field for that. And then the last thing we need to go ahead and do is actually provide a description about what it returns, so we can see that field as well. So right here, we're just going to go ahead and say return balance in the file. And so then we're going to add that returns field right there. So that kind of completes our documentation for this particular method. All right, so we'll go ahead and close this. We'll come down a little bit. So we're going to want to go ahead and start creating the next method. So if we take a look back in our main method, we know that the next method is going to be for performing a deposit. So we want to go ahead and do that next. So let's come back down here a little bit and go ahead and get that started. Or actually, one other thing we can go ahead and do, if we come back up to the top, we can go ahead and grab this note that we have right here. We'll go ahead and take that, and we'll go ahead and insert that about right here so we can kind of keep track of what we're expected to do now. So we'll create another documentation comment, just paste that statement right there so we know that this next method is the one for performing deposits on that bank account balance. So for this one, what we're going to go ahead and do is there's maybe two different ways we could think about approaching this. One is to just do it for the calculation, so taking our balance and then adding some deposit that we provide. Alternatively, we could go ahead and do that calculation, and then we could also go ahead and return the final amount for balance after we do that. So let's say, for now, we'll keep this kind of simple. Let's say that we just want to do the calculation, and then we'll just leave it to the user to use the get balance method to kind of check what just happened to their account balance. So let's go ahead and say for this one we don't return anything, so we're going to do public static void. So it would be a void for the return type. I'm not going to include a return statement anywhere in this. And for this one, what we're going to go ahead and do is just say something like Calc Deposit. Okay. And for Calc Deposit, this is going to require two things, as I mentioned before. One of those is that we still need to give it the name of the file, so we know where to go to get the balance that we're going to perform some kind of operation with. So we need a string for the name of that file, and we'll kind of go through the same steps that we just went through right here. The other thing that we need is going to be the amount that we want to deposit. So we're going to have a double right here, and we'll call this deposit. And at this point, we already kind of know what to expect as far as the code inside of this. At least enough that we know that we're going to need another throws clause. So we can just go ahead and put that right now. So we'll say that this throws an IO exception, and then we can go ahead and move on to the actual body of this. Alright, so for this one, to start off with, we know that we need to open up that file, so we can go ahead and read from it. So let's go ahead and say we do something like file. It's going to be equal to a new file. Put in file name right here. And then what we want to go ahead and do is use a scanner. So we'll go ahead and say something like scanner input file is going to be equal to a new scanner object. And it's going to be taking this file object that we just created, since we want to read from that. We again can go ahead and create a balance. So we'll say something like double balance is going to be equal to the input file dot next double. And then what we want to go ahead and do is actually use that balance to perform some kind of operation. So right here, what we can go ahead and do is just take that balance, and what we want to do is we want to just add on to that balance whatever the deposit is. So we're going to do something like balance plus deposit. And then we want to take this and store that back into the balance, because essentially what this is doing is just updating it. So what we can go ahead and do is just use a combined assignment operator and just say balance plus equals deposit. And so what that's going to do is basically just add them together and then store that back into balance, just the same as all the other times that you've seen a combined assignment operator. And from here, what we can go ahead and do is one option would be to return this. The other option is to then just go ahead and write this to that file. Admittedly, writing to the file is something we should do regardless of whether or not we want to return it. So the next thing we want to go ahead and include is a print writer, so we can go ahead and overwrite the current balance and replace that with this new balance. So we'll go ahead and make a print writer object. Say this is going to be equal to output file, and it's going to be equal to a new print writer, which is going to again take the name of the file. So put file name right there. And from here, what we want to go ahead and do is just say that we want to take the output file and we want to go ahead and just do a print line statement where we go ahead and print the balance into it. And then after we've done that, the last thing we want to go ahead and do to make sure that that actually happened is to close that file. So another thing that we should probably go ahead and address is that we're currently missing closing the file on a couple of these. So if we take a look back over here in our get balance method, we'll notice that after reading out the balance that's in it, we forgot to close the file. So just to make sure that nothing ever goes wrong with that, we should probably go ahead and take care of that. So we're going to go ahead and do input file.close. Go ahead and save that. If we come down here, we can go ahead and do the same thing with this. So we're going to put that right here and save that. And then finally, for our print writer, after we're done writing to the file, we can go ahead and close this as well, or output file. .close. Okay. So now that we've got all that, now there's something else that's probably worth addressing. So inside of Calc Deposit, we've got a few lines of code right here, namely this set of code. And you'll notice that that little bit of code is exactly the same as pretty much everything that we did inside of get balance. The only thing that's different is that we have this return statement at the end. So if that's the case, it seems like this might be a good opportunity to just use get balance inside of Calc Deposit to kind of reduce the amount of code that we're doing there. So let's see if we can kind of clean this up a little bit to achieve that. So if we come down here, let's say that instead of doing all of this to get the balance, we'll go ahead and just remove all of that. And instead, we'll go ahead and just create a variable inside of Calc Deposit for this balance. So say double balance, and say that that's going to be equal to that call to the get balance method. And then we'll just go ahead and put in the file name that we just got. Go ahead and save that. And so now what's going to happen is that whenever we call Calc Deposit in the main method, that's going to come over to this code right here. And the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to see this line right here where we're declaring a variable called balance. And then we make another call to the get balance method. So essentially it's going to go from the main method to Calc Deposit, and then from Calc Deposit to get balance. So we're going to go to get balance, passing in the file name. So that's just kind of getting moved around pretty much all over the place at this point. So if we come over to get balance, we're going to go ahead and give it that file name. So we're going to use that right here. We're going to do all of the code just the same as we did when we called this directly from the main method with our first step that we got through. And then at the very end, we're going to go ahead and return the balance. And so when we hit this return statement, this is going to need to return control to the calling method. So what that means is that when we're done here, we're going to go back to Calc Deposit, because that's the method that called it. So right here. And then we're going to go ahead and take that balance that we just got. We'll put that into this balance field. And then from there, we'll go ahead and just finish the rest of Calc Deposit. So just go through the rest of this code that we already have. And when we get to the end of this method, then we're going to go ahead and return control to this calling method, which was the main method. So from here, we're going to go back to the main method, specifically to some line somewhere around here where we actually called the Calc Deposit method. So let's go ahead and fill this out now with all of the information it's going to need. So to start off with, we need to go ahead and create another input dialog asking for the file name. So basically exactly what we have right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and start off by grabbing this line. Just go ahead and copy that. I'm just going to place that line right there. The next thing I'm going to need to do is actually provide the amount that I want to deposit. So we're going to say double deposit is going to be equal to, and this will be another input dialog box. But the interesting thing about this one is that we need the value to be a double, but it's going to start off as a string because that's just what the return value for any input dialog box. It's always going to be a string. So let's say we start off by just writing out our show input dialog, keeping in mind that this will of course give us an error. So include something like this, and it immediately starts to show us the error because at this point it's already expecting a string from this, but this is not compatible with that. So it's going to immediately tell us that it's incompatible. So we'll go ahead and fix that in just a moment. First, we'll go ahead and finish up this message. So right here, we're just going to say, please enter amount to deposit. Okay. So now we want to go ahead and try to fix that conversion. So the way that I've typically shown you how to do this is that you would first go ahead and make a string. You take the results from your input dialog and you put it into that string. And then on the next line, you'd go ahead and create your double variable, and you take the string and you parse it or convert it into a double and then store it into that variable. So let's say that instead of doing this in 2 lines of code, I'm just going to go ahead and make this more compact and do this in 1 line of code. So let's say that instead we just go ahead and do something like double.parseDouble right here. And then inside of that, we're going to go ahead and put in, let's get rid of that extra stuff, the entire call to JOptionPane.show input dialog. So at this point now what I'm going to do is just essentially kind of combine one method with another, where I'm going to have all of this inside of my call to parse double. And so now what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and just do all of this, this processing all at once. So kind of going through the sequence of steps here, it will first make this call to show input dialog. It'll say, please enter the amount to deposit. We'll go ahead and put in our amount. We'll push enter. It will take that amount, which is currently a string, and it will now use that inside of this parse double method. And so whatever amount we just entered, it's going to take that and it's going to parse that into a double, so that then it can go ahead and store that into this deposit variable. And then what we want to go ahead and do is take the file name and the deposit. We'll go ahead and make that call to Calc Deposit. So we're going to actually go ahead and perform the calculation. So we'll go ahead and do Calc Deposit. We'll put in the file name, since that was the first parameter that it was expecting. So it's going to be the first argument that we include. And then we're going to have deposit, since that's the second parameter. So we want to make sure that that's the second argument. Go ahead and save that. And so now if we go ahead and run this program, we can go ahead and test out option 2. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. And so now we'll go ahead and do option 2. So first it's going to ask for the name of the file. So we'll go ahead and put that in. Push OK. We'll then go ahead and specify the amount to deposit. So let's say we want to go ahead and just add a little bit of money to our current balance, say something like $150. Go ahead and push OK. And so then our build will be successful. And so now, if we go ahead and choose option 1 to take a look at what the current balance is, so we run this again, we'll choose option 1, we'll specify that we want to read from our balance.txt, that balance text file, push OK, and now we see that our current balance is $950. So we've gone ahead and taken that 800 and we've added another 150 to it. Go ahead and push OK. And so then to kind of wrap up on this method, we'll come down here, and we'll go ahead and take our description that we have. So let's go ahead and grab this general description, go ahead and cut that. We'll go ahead and update this documentation comment. So just go ahead and remake it and just have it auto-populate with all of the annotation tags. And then we'll just go ahead and paste that general description back into there. Alright, so the next thing we'll go ahead and take a look at is going to be the last option. So that's going to be dealing with withdrawals. So if we come back up to the main method, we've got option 3 right here to perform a withdrawal. Additionally, we've got a comment right here to perform withdrawals on the bank account balance. So let's go ahead and grab that. We'll take that down to the bottom right here. And let's go ahead and put that in right here. So let's say public static. We'll go ahead and do this the same way that we did our calc deposit methods. We're going to say public static void calc withdrawal. This is going to be expecting a string for the file name and then a double for the withdrawal this time. So I say string file name double withdrawal. This is going to throw an IO exception just like the other two methods because we're dealing with file input and output. So then right here what we want to go ahead and do is make sure that we get the balance because we need to use that in our math operations. So we're going to go ahead and do double balance is equal to a call to the get balance method, and we'll go ahead and just pass in the file name. So it'll be pretty much exactly like what we did for the first line of Calc Deposit. The next thing that we want to go ahead and do is take that withdrawal and subtract that from the balance. So we're going to say balance. In this case, we'll do minus equals as our combined assignment operator, and then we'll go ahead and specify the withdrawal right here. So that's going to be based on this parameter that we're giving it. And then we want to go ahead and just create our print writer and just print that new balance to the file. So this particular part is going to look exactly like what we did for Calc Deposit. So for this last little bit, I'm just going to go ahead and grab these last 3 lines. We'll just go ahead and copy those, and we'll just go ahead and place those right there. And of course, if you want to, you could also kind of think about the fact that we just had to do a little bit of copying and pasting. Anytime that you see an instance where you do a little bit of copying and pasting like that, there might be some consideration for just creating a method to handle that little bit for you. It really kind of depends on just how much you want to break the overall problem or the overall program up. But let's say in this case, we just want to go ahead and use this little bit of code in both of these methods. So this will be everything that we need for calc withdrawal. And then right here, we'll go ahead and create another documentation comment. So we'll go ahead and do that. Let it auto-populate with those annotation tags. And now I'll go ahead and paste in that message that I just overwrote with that other copy. So let's come over to the slides. We want to go ahead and grab this one, copy that, and let's go ahead and place that right there. So this method is going to be used to perform withdrawals on the bank account balance. Okay, so now that we've got that, now we can come back up to the main method and we can go ahead and put together everything for this particular part. So this is going to be the same as what we did for Calc Deposit. The difference is, of course, now we're doing a withdrawal, so we're taking some amount of money out of the account. So let's say that I want to go ahead and just copy what I've got right here, and we'll go ahead and paste that into this section. Keep in mind that if we do it this way, that you need to pay very close attention to the different parts that you should go ahead and change. So we'll go ahead and grab this and place that here. So there's a couple of different things that we need to go ahead and clean up in this. For example, anywhere where we see the word deposit, we should go ahead and replace that with withdrawal instead. So let's go ahead and do that. So instead of doing a deposit variable, let's do a withdrawal variable. Right here, we're going to say that we want to enter the amount to withdraw. Right here, this is going to change to withdrawal. And then also make sure that you change the name of the method from Calc Deposit to Calc Withdrawal. Go ahead and save that. And so now, if we go ahead and run this program and choose option 3, we can go ahead and see what it's like to take some amount of money out of that account. So we'll go ahead and run this. So we'll go ahead and choose option 3. We'll first enter the name of the file where we're going to go get that bank account balance. So do balance.txt. We'll then go ahead and specify the amount to withdraw. So in this case, let's say we want to take a fairly large amount of that money out. Let's do something like 450. Go ahead and push OK. And so that was successful. So now if we go ahead and run this and choose option 1, then we can go ahead and take a look at how much is in there. So do the name of the file. Push OK. And so now we see that the current balance is $500. So previously it was $950. we went ahead and took $450 out, and so the end result was $500 that still remains in the account. Okay, so there's one last thing that I want to go ahead and do with this program. With the way that we've approached this so far, you've noticed that we've added multiple options, but there's this kind of weird, sort of clunky thing that I have to do where I will choose an option and then the program will terminate, and then I have to rerun it and go choose another option. Say like if I perform a deposit or a withdrawal, I don't get to see the end result of that, or at the very least I can't just do that while the program is still running. I've got to let it terminate and then start back up again. So I want to go ahead and kind of clean that up a little bit. One option is to go ahead and display the amount to the user at the end. So while that's okay, you could also imagine a situation where the user wants to do things like a deposit and a withdrawal, or if you imagine that this program becomes larger and there's more features added to it, that they want to be able to do multiple actions in a single run of the program. They don't really want it to terminate after every single action that they take. So let's go ahead and clean this up with one last option where the user can decide when the program should terminate, and we'll go ahead and make sure that if they don't choose that option, that the program is just constantly running. So what we can go ahead and do is we can actually go ahead and just take everything that we've put into the main method, and we can actually put that into just one giant while loop. And basically in this while loop, we're just going to say that while true, so just essentially almost like an infinite loop. Just go ahead and put all the code into that. And then what we're going to go ahead and do is include one option that will terminate the program. So basically it's going to be an option that's going to make use out of this system.exit to go ahead and close the application. So let's go ahead and do that. So right here at the very top, we're going to go ahead and say while true. Go ahead and place one curly brace right there. Just go ahead and let it fill out both of those. So from here, what we're going to go ahead and do is just take all of this. So it's going to warn me about the fact that this is unreachable because I have this infinite loop right above it. So that's going to go away as soon as I grab all this code and move it. So we just want to go ahead and grab all of this code. Just go ahead and cut everything. We're going to go ahead and place it right here. So right now it's going to start off with the without the indentation on most all of the lines. So one other thing to go ahead and do is to just kind of go through all of this up to right here. That line's fine. So up to this line. We want to go ahead and just tab all of this over so that now we can actually have the appropriate style. So we can see based on this curly brace and all the way at the bottom, this closing curly brace, everything that's inside of those curly braces has been tabbed over once. So based on the indentation and the style of it, it's very clear what goes where. And then the last thing we want to go ahead and do is just take the system.exit. So again, it's just warning me that this is unreachable because I have an infinite loop above it. So I want to go ahead and just grab this, go ahead and cut that. And then what I want to go ahead and do is just add a fourth option to my first input dialog box. It's basically like my main menu. So for this fourth one, we'll go ahead and say something like this, and then we'll say for exit the program. And of course, this is still going off the line, so just do the same thing I did for the other parts. Just move it down a little bit. Not quite that far. Right there will be fine. And of course, there's a couple of other instances where you see it kind of move over to the next line. If you want to try to come up with clever ways to make sure that that doesn't happen, then you can certainly kind of explore a little bit with that. But I think for most of these, this program would be kind of hard to read if I move every one of these to the next line. So I'm going to kind of leave that alone. So the next thing we want to go ahead and do is just add that fourth option. So we need to go ahead and add on to our set of if, else, if statements. So right here after option 3, we'll go ahead and say else if input dot equals, and then do a for. And for this one, what we want to go ahead and do is just put in that system.exit right there. So that's all it's going to do is just close the program. And then if we wanted to, maybe one other thing we could go ahead and do just to let the user know that it's going to be closing it. Let's say we go ahead and just do one message dialog box just to tell them that that's what's happening. So do joptionpane.show message dialog. Go ahead and grab that one. Set that to null. And then for the string right here, we're just going to go ahead and say exiting the program. Go ahead and save that. And so now if we run this, Now it's going to go ahead and just constantly stay within this loop until we eventually tell it to exit. So if I go ahead and run this, so now it's going to show the input dialog. I'll go ahead and push 1. So that's going to show me the next input dialog box to go ahead and enter the name of the file. I push OK. It's going to show that the current balance is 500. After this, it's going to go ahead and just skip over the rest of my else if and my else statements. It'll hit the end of the while loop and then kind of loop back to the top and then just go again. So at this point, I push OK, and now it comes back to the beginning of the program. And so now if I go ahead and choose another option, let's say we go ahead and just do a deposit this time. So we currently have $500 in there. Let's say we want to go ahead and just add a bunch more money back into this account. So do another $500, push OK. And I probably should have paid attention to the order that I was doing those in. Let's see, at this point this is going to close it. Let's just close and try again. We're not going to worry too much about input validation when we make silly mistakes like that, though. Let's assume that the user can read, unlike me. So say, please enter the name of the file, balance.txt, push OK. Say, please enter the amount to deposit. In this case, we'll go ahead and do the 500 that I suggested earlier, push OK, and then it'll loop back to the beginning so we can see the rest of the program again. So now if we choose option 1 again, go ahead and enter the name of the file, push OK, and then it'll say the current balance is $1,000, push OK, loops back to the beginning. So now you can kind of see the general idea here and how this is a much better flow for the program. And so then when we're actually done with everything, we can just go ahead and choose option 4. So put that in, push OK, exit the program, and then just go ahead and close out the application. Alright, so at this point that will cover everything for the first problem. So we got to see how to actually put together something that kind of feels like a complete program. It's fairly simple in what it's supposed to do, but it at least feels like a complete program that you might actually use. So in the next video, what we'll go ahead and do is just move on to the next problem that we're going to take a look at. So to give you a little bit of an idea about that one, in the next video we're going to take a look at a problem that is going to deal with being able to perform conversions. So we'll see that next.